That fine fella next to me is Adam Scher, and we've got a 7-game Major League Baseball slate for you today. Let me adjust this camera a little bit. Our boy Alex Baker, Awesomeo, has been hosting when he's on. I wasn't on last Thursday because there was only, 2 games, and then Friday, Josh covered for me. So getting back into this hosting deal, and I messed something up. Well, we're good now. Anyway, glad to have you with us. I just now figured out that Adam had a new computer because I haven't hosted in over a week. And it was amazing when he entered the room, there wasn't the loading circle for 5 minutes and then very pixelated head moving around. He popped right up. It wasn't the internet. He never needed a modem. He just needed a new computer. Man, does that make me happy.
Yeah, nice to have finally figured out what the issue was. So it's been a fun week.
All right, well, 7 games here. Let's get into it, but before we do, let me ask you just a couple questions here regarding the slate. A lot of good pitching up top. You've got Chris Sale, Hyunjin Ryu, minor, just above 10K on DraftKings. Charlie Morton, Martin Perez, Carlos Carrasco, of course. How are you breaking all of this down? Are you going to mix a bunch of these guys in, or are you going to see yourself ending up heavy on 1 or 2 of these options?
Well, fortunately, we just got early news that the Yankees game is postponed. So
it is postponed. Okay.
Yeah. So it takes Chris Sale off the board and basically leaves you at the top with Ryu and Carrasco. I'm anticipating just getting to a lot of Carrasco. I know that he'll be popular, but I think there's just such a big price difference between him and Ryu that I imagine I'll end up getting there for the most part. Nothing against Ryu. It's really just the pricing difference for me. I would need a pretty big gap in ownership, I think, to justify paying a lot more money for Ryu than Carrasco.
All right. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm in the same spot. Let's just get into it then. We've got Boston and the New York Yankees. Chris Sale, J.A. Happ is – no, I'm sorry. They don't have that game because Adam just mentioned it was postponed.
I was waiting to see how long you were going to go with that game.
You know what? I didn't refresh, so I'll go by like the DraftKings, the games up top on the slider or on the scroll, and I just forgot to refresh it. So I didn't get that blanked out box, and I was just going to keep going with it. But good. Thanks for stopping me. All right. Let's jump into it again for the second time here. Actually, they still haven't. It's still up there. Milwaukee, Pittsburgh. Truthfully, Joe Musgrove has struggled quite a bit this season, but we've also seen DraftKings price a lot of players up. And while you're still looking at a relatively high total for the Milwaukee Brewers going against him, it's hard to argue that there isn't value here. 4.7 total for the Brewers. Last time I updated it, I can take another look now. And then on the other side of this one, against Chase Anderson, Pittsburgh has a 4.4 run total. But Musgrove coming in at 6K on DraftKings. I'm speaking specifically to DraftKings because it's a 2-pitcher site, and he's cheaper, comparatively speaking, than he would be on Yahoo, and you're not going to play him on FanDuel. So what do you make of Musgrove here in a really friendly pitcher's park, in a tough matchup, but at a very cheap price?
So this is another game that does have weather concerns. It's something that I think we'll have to, really keep an eye on up till lock. But putting that aside, I agree with you that this is really just a DraftKings conversation because FanDuel's a 1-pitcher site and because Yahoo, he's more expensive than Chase Anderson in the same game. He's more expensive than some other, SP2s that you can take chances on. So it's primarily DraftKings. But at 6K on DraftKings, I would be getting the Musgrove if this game plays. It's not an appealing matchup as far as strikeouts go. It's not an appealing matchup as far as opponent because Milwaukee, of course, is a really good offense. They have, I think it's 4 lefties in the top 6 of this lineup. Then they have Eric Dames batting 7th as well. Musgrove, going back to last year, has only struck out 16.5% of lefties. So it's not a spot where you expect him to pile up strikeouts, but it is a park downgrade for Milwaukee. And while he hasn't struck out a lot of lefties, he has done a good job of limiting production. So far this year, a 317 expected WOBA, 130 expected ISO to lefties. Since last year, those numbers are 304 and 131. And the ballpark should help him. So it's basically a price play, but I think that he's just as talented as any of the cheap pitchers around him. The matchup isn't great for anyone. Like you look at other pitchers, Manny Benuelos is just bad. He's facing an Indians team that doesn't strike out a ton. Here you've got Kikuchi, who doesn't strike guys out, and he's facing the team with the lowest strikeout percentage in the league. There's not a whole lot of SP2s that you feel good about. So I'm fine going to just a really cheap Musgrove here.
Yeah, so am I. Obviously, I think the both of us would always prefer Musgrove against a righty heavy lineup, but at this price, you may just have to bite the bullet, right? Only four righties in this lineup, but he's so cheap that it's hard to get away from that, and that's kind of what it comes down to. What about the other side, Chase Anderson? It's kind of amazing. Chase Anderson this season has only allowed what? How many home runs has Chase Anderson allowed? I think like 5 or something. Let me pull it up.
0.
Wait, he hasn't allowed a single home run this year? 3.
On the FanGraphs. What'd you say? 3
home runs.
Okay, because on the FanGraphs page, it has 0 home runs per 9. I don't know why.
That's kind of weird. Now, are you looking against lefties or righties?
No, I have it as a starter. Maybe did he come in as like a follower at some point?
Yeah, he's started 4 games and he's pitched 9 games.
Okay, that's why.
So that makes sense. But anyway, he's allowed 3 home runs. Last year he allowed 30 home runs, and 22 of them were at home. I remember the dramatic splits, but he still hasn't been all that special. Granted, he came out of the bullpen in several instances this season, and he is actually striking out north of a batter per 9. But again, out of the bullpen, you're going to see those numbers inflate. What's your read on a guy like Chase Anderson today?
I think that it's kind of comparable to what we were saying about Musgrove. It's not as scary an offense, Pittsburgh that is, but not a lot of strikeouts there, and it is predominantly left-handed. Anderson gives up most of his power to righties. He does a much better job limiting power to lefties, but the strikeouts primarily have come against right-handed hitters. 27.7% strikeout rate to righties this year, 20.8% to lefties. So it's another spot where I think that there's a pretty good chance that Anderson is able to limit damage in this park. It's just that I don't really know how many strikeouts are there. I think on Yahoo, where he's $31, so he's $4 or $5 less expensive than Musgrove, I'm perfectly happy going there because I think it's a very similar spot, and the Pirates are a bit less dangerous than the Brewers are. But on DraftKings, I don't see the need to pay an extra $1,000 for Anderson when I don't think I'm really getting much other than a slightly more favorable matchup in terms of production for the other team. But that's not something that I concern myself with too much. So neither pitcher is someone that I'm interested on the 1 pitcher sites. And then on the 2 pitcher sites, really just whichever one's cheaper for me.
What do you make of hitters in this game, given that Musgrove probably is going to carry decent ownership just based on that price point alone? And again, really speaking primarily DraftKings, because you'd be looking for leverage here. It's not a great park. But Musgrove has struggled against lefties, albeit not much in the power department. Do you see any use to go Milwaukee hitters here?
I think it's a pretty unappealing game in general. If you think about, just how guys match up here, you're looking for power righties against Anderson. Really the only guy that even meets that criteria whatsoever is Starling Marte for the Pirates. And then on the other side, Musgrove has done a good job of limiting production. I do think that if Musgrove's projected for a lot of ownership, which I would expect, like you said, on DraftKings, with it only being a 6-game slate and him being cheap, Milwaukee's just a really talented offense. So I would have no qualms with going to, a really good team that is facing a popular pitcher. I don't think it's a really high likely spot. It's not a spot where I think that there's a bunch of really good one-offs here. I wrote up Yasmani Grandal today because catcher sucks and he has a lot of power, but I think that outside of that, there's nobody that really stands out as like a top play at their position to me, but you are still talking about just a very high upside offense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the way that this lineup is set up, it's always, relatively easy to stack them too, which does make it a bit more appealing. But outside of that, I agree. It's not the most appealing game altogether, outside of Musgrove being really cheap on DraftKings. Tampa Bay and Minnesota, we've got ourselves Charlie Morton, Martin Perez on the respective mounds for their teams, on the mounds for their respective teams, I should say. And, well, Charlie Morton has been downright nasty this year, Adam. I mean, when you look at the guy's numbers, he's got a K rate that's sitting at, 30%? 31%. 11.5 Ks per 9. He's striking same-handed hitters out at 37%. He's just across the board, called plus swinging strike rates up around 33%. His stuff has been really good. He's also not very cheap and facing a Minnesota team that does not strike out all that often. No Astudillo today, but the case still remains. What are your thoughts on a guy like Morton when you have a similarly priced, say, Carrasco?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Morton becomes kind of interesting as like a tournament pivot now that we don't have Sale as a pivot to Carrasco. But again, I just don't really see myself getting there for a couple of reasons. For one, you have, I think Carrasco is just as good a strikeout pitcher as Morton. Morton's number 2 on the slate in strikeout, or now number 1 on the slate in strikeout percentage, and Carrasco's number 2 just behind them. All of their called strike plus swinging strike that are similar. But Morton walks more guys, and he generally doesn't go as deep in the games, and he's got a much less appealing matchup against Minnesota. So it's still just, pretty tough for me to get there unless there's a big ownership gap. The only thing that makes him, I think, a little bit more favorable than Ryu, if you are looking for a pivot from Carrasco, is that you're not sacrificing bats to do it. You're only paying an extra like $500 for him.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Where would you grade this Minnesota lineup in terms of quality of matchup for Morton?
You mean how do you mean?
Like no Astudillo, Buxton was day to day, but he is in the lineup. Like, do you like this more for him than you would have, or less than you would have? I think it's a little bit better for him.
Yeah, I think it's decent for him. Like Buxton being there adds strikeouts, but he's batting 9th, so not the best spot in the order. No Jorge Polanco is appealing as well. He's a low strikeout guy, but also one of the higher walk percentages on the team. I think it's about as good a spot as you're gonna, or as good a lineup as you could get from Morton. You have below average hitters with Adrianza, with Castro. He has some power, but he's not an above average hitter overall. It's still just a lot of guys that don't strike out a ton, though.
Right. Yeah, I think it's, like you said, as good as it gets, but that doesn't mean it's great. Martin Perez has been very good this season. He's going to go up against the Tampa Bay team that is running out, all but 2 righties, 7-righty lineup. Austin Meadows, Brandon Lau are your 2 left-handed bats. And Martin Perez's price point has come up quite a bit. So 2 good pitchers, both in kind of weird pricing spots compared to who's around them. Thoughts on Perez here at the Trop?
Not much interest in Perez for me. He has obviously been better this year than in previous years, but I still think he's a pretty average pitcher that is like $9,000 on DraftKings. He has a 22.5% strikeout percentage this season that comes in behind a lot of pitchers on the slate. He's walking over 10% of hitters. His xFIP is 4.38. He's basically just been like average. There are strikeouts in this lineup for Tampa Bay, but I think it's just a higher price point than I would want to pay. I do think that there is some favorable pricing on Tampa Bay hitters. Perez has done a good job of limiting production from righties, thanks to the increase in fastball velocity and the improved cutter. But you have a really bad catcher position today with Travis d'Arnaud hitting 5th at close to minimum price. Willy Adames is hitting 4th at a really cheap price tag. And then the actually good hitters in the lineup, Tommy Pham and Avisaíl Garcia, both have power and both are affordable. So I think that Tampa Bay is a team where, with it being a 6-game slate and with the good stacks being pretty obvious, I think Tampa's a spot where you could get to at low ownership.
All right. Any other bats from this game you're interested in?
Not really, no.
All right. Yeah, me neither. Kansas City, Texas, bit of a different story here. Mike Minor, Jake Junis, very high totals in this one. You've got Texas sitting up around 5.7. They're huge favorites at home. Obviously, Globe Life plays really well for bats. And Jake Junis, we know, is one of the more homer-prone righties in the league, especially one of the more homer-prone righties on this slate, or pitchers on this slate. 86 degrees at first pitch. I guess we can talk about pitching first, and just where you stand on a guy like Mike Minor, who is, 10-3 on DraftKings. He's 9-2 on FanDuel, and on Yahoo, Minor's coming in at $48. He's pitched really well at Texas this year, but with this elevated price point, it does seem a little bit unnecessary.
Yeah, exactly. He's good, but when you compare him to really what it is that Carrasco's price point across the industry is just so much cheaper than it really should be. That it gets really tough to get to other pitchers that are priced up there. Minor's been he's been good this year. He has a 25.5% strikeout percentage, 7.8% walk percentage. That's still almost 4 percentage points lower than Carrasco's strikeout percentage, and it's 3.5 percentage points higher than Carrasco's walk percentage. His xFIP is like 3/4 of a run higher. And Kansas City is a perfectly fine matchup for Minor, but the White Sox are a really good matchup for Carrasco, and Texas is a tough place to pitch. So, outside of just trying to be contrarian at that spot, I just don't really have an argument for getting to Minor over Carrasco.
All right. Well, neither do I. It's really tough. The only argument is ownership, but like, is that worth it? And I think that's what you're saying. It's kind of not. Mike, and it's not like Mike Minor's still what? Well, Carrasco right now we have him projected at 48% on DraftKings, which makes sense. 29% on FanDuel and 53% on Yahoo. So, and he's going to be the highest owned pitcher for good reason. And we'll get to that game next. We can talk about some strategy approaches there. But let's stick here for a minute and talk bats. Look, Texas is in a phenomenal spot against Junis. We know that they're jam-packed with power lefties. Chu, Gallo is in the lineup. Nomar Mazara. Cabrera's hit well at home. Rougned Odor's super cheap. He's going to be real chalky on some sites. Got another lefty and Guzman down batting eighth. But a lot of these guys are super expensive, Adam. I mean, you take this outfield combination of Joey Gallo and Shin-Soo Choo and Pence. They're all 5,300 or higher on DraftKings.
Yeah, I'm glad that we have this team priced up, because otherwise I don't think there would be a whole lot of creativity whatsoever to this slate. You do at least have to make some sacrifices somewhere to get to Texas, which is nice, but it's a nice spot for them. You have a pitcher in Junis who doesn't strike out a lot of guys, has never struck out a lot of lefties, and even his strikeout numbers to righties are down this year. He's always had issues with home runs, and going into Texas shouldn't help with that. I'm very willing to pay that price tag for Joey Gallo, who is having the best season of his career. He's been one of the best hitters in baseball this year. You have Hunter Pence having a resurgent season after basically being out of baseball almost. But then you get a reasonable price tag on Mazara, who doesn't have the same kind of power that Gallo does, but you're getting the price discount. Chu is expensive and doesn't really have the power to warrant that price tag, but he's still an above average hitter in terms of production. He gets on base. He can still get a lot, do a lot of things at the plate. So I think Texas, is clearly a really good stack. It's just that they are expensive, like you said. So, if you can get to Joe Musgrove, that'll help a lot. If the weather doesn't cooperate there, then you're going to be running some, really questionable pitchers out there to try and get to Texas.
Right. What are your thoughts on the bottom half lineup or stacks for Texas?
I think it's a good way to be contrarian in tournaments, because we know that people just avoid those for whatever reason. And so it lets you get this team with a 5.7 implied run total and still get some lower owned hitters in there. Below Asdrubal Cabrera, I don't expect, or I guess Odor will probably have ownership too, just because he's cheap. But like Ronald Guzman is a guy that you can use to be contrarian, because he's batting eighth and he'll probably come in with lower ownership than the rest of the team, but he does have power. And that's really all you're looking for in tournaments. He does get fewer at bats than if he were batting first or second, but he's still got enough power to do damage here at lower ownership. So going to the bottom of the Texas order, even if it's not a completely sequential stack, if you're just mixing in like Ronald Guzman or something like that, I think that it's a pretty good way to have a popular stack, but still be a little bit different.
Any thoughts on Kansas City bats here against Mike Minor?
Yeah, I think there's some value here that opens up a lot for you. You have Nicky Lopez leading off. He's only $3,100 on DraftKings. It's a lefty-lefty matchup, but he's only $3,100, and second base is a really bad position today. You basically have, at second base, you have Kike Hernandez, who I like, but then beyond that, you have like Rougned Odor, who has massive flaws. You have Nicky, and then you just have, like Nicky Lopez for really cheap. You have Chris Owings also on this Kansas City team for almost the minimum across the industry. And while Minor is good, it is still a park upgrade for Kansas City. And, most importantly, you're just saving a lot of money. So I think going to, those two cheaper bats is pretty appealing. You could also use like a Martin Maldonado at catcher, batting sixth in a more favorable hitting environment than Travis d'Arnaud has in Tampa.
All right. Yeah, Travis d'Arnaud, man. He continues to get ownership because he's cheap, but he's also really, really bad. So, you do with what you do what you want with that one, but there are ways to get away from it, like you just said. And look, Mike Minor's good, but Maldonado's got a significantly better park, better weather, you name it. You could do a lot worse than him for sure. Hey, by the way, I mentioned our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, at the top of the show, but I did not mention that they are a great place to play daily fantasy sports, especially for anyone that isn't looking to load 150 lineups in or compete against 150 lineups from 50 different sharks each and every day. 10 max entry on their guaranteed contests. They're running contests sometimes with zero management fee whatsoever, like the $3 one today, which is $4,500 guaranteed, no management fee at all. That one filled up a while ago. You want to get in early on that. When Jake and I did the strategy show today, there were like 200 spots left, and it was, 10 a.m. So check that one out early for sure. And all of their other contests as well, their management fees, even when they have them, are much lower than the other sites. And when you do it, we're going to drop a link in our YouTube chat right now. Use that link and use the code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, when you sign up. Get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, YSRPs, to be used as currency on the site to win money. And if you want, withdraw that money as actual U.S. dollars or well, yes, U.S. dollars. I know you Canadians have your things about Yahoo, but check it out. Use the code, sign up through the link, get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points when you deposit. All right, Adam, let's keep moving here. We've got Cleveland and the White Sox. Carlos Carrasco, Manny Banuelos. Carrasco, as we talked about just moments ago, is going to be the chalkiest pitcher on the slate for good reason. You mentioned second highest K rate on the slate. He's definitely volatile at times, but he's also good. For his career, he's also been significantly better on the road. Take that for what it's worth. But he has a 14.2% swinging strike rate. With Sale out, it's the highest on the slate. There's just a lot of things here that suggest Carrasco's season should begin to get better and not worse going forward, especially against a K-heavy team like the White Sox.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, highest strikeout percentage on the slate now, or second highest to Morton. But he ranks 14th out of all starting pitchers this year that have thrown at least 750 pitches in called strike plus swinging strike percentage. He's 26th among qualified starters in PCRA, which comes in at 3.44, 1.16 runs lower than his ERA. The one thing that you mentioned that he's volatile, and that's true. He's allowed a 14.1% barrels per batted ball percentage this year, which is just like astronomically high. It's higher than I think maybe every single qualified starter. So that's
a really high number. Yeah,
that's where the volatility comes from. Like some starts just doesn't have command in the strike zone. We know he doesn't walk a lot of guys, and if he's not hitting his spots in the zone, he can get hit really, really hard. So that kind of leads into, I think, the strategy discussion here, where I think Carrasco is clearly the number one point per dollar pitcher play on this slate. He's the guy that you want to get to in cash games. He's the guy that I expect to be my highest owned pitcher in tournaments. But you do have favorable pricing on the White Sox here. You do have some guys that have power with, at the middle of this order with Moncada, Abreu, Alonso, and then Jimenez hitting sixth. They're guys where if Carrasco's making mistakes in the zone, they can punish him. And it's a 6-game slate. So, having stacks against Carlos Carrasco certainly wouldn't be the craziest thing I've done, especially when you consider how much ownership he's getting. So there's at least a path to him getting blown up, and it's, through home runs from the White Sox because he's missing over the plate. So I think that most likely the way that I end up approaching it is I'll have a lot of Carrasco, and then in the lineups where I am fading Carrasco, I expect a high percentage of those lineups will be White Sox stacks because his price point is just so affordable, and he's so underpriced that it's really tough for him to not be a good play at that price unless he gets blown up. And if he gets blown up, you want the White Sox bats.
Right. And something that kind of coincides with this barreled balls that you mentioned, only J.A. Happ has allowed, and he's not on the slate anymore. So the 13 home runs Carrasco has allowed this season is the highest on this slate by 3. That's a lot of home runs. And as good as he is from a strikeout standpoint, this guy's allowed Listen to this, dude. This is pretty incredible. His last 5 starts: 3 home runs, 2 home runs, 0, 0, 4 home runs. So multi-homer games for his opponent in 3 of his last 4: a 2, a 3, and a 4, or 3 of his last 5. Like, he definitely has a problem with hard hit fly balls.
Yeah, while you were talking, I scrolled through the pitchers on the PCRA leaderboard I was looking at. There are 2 pitchers on there that have higher barrels per batted ball event percentages than Carrasco this season. They are Derek Holland and David Hess. So
he's in good company, is what you're
yeah.
saying.
Yeah, I mean, and then the other guys, like with elevated ones, like if you look at the good pitchers, like you look at pitchers around Carrasco that have similar or like double digit barrel per batted ball events. Caleb Smith, who we know is someone that strikes out a lot of guys and is a good pitcher, but will give up power. Shane Bieber, same thing, has, a home run issue. Patrick Corbin, Trevor Bauer, like it's guys that are good or, pretty good pitchers, but that have been tagged, for home runs this year. So I think that it's a spot where Carrasco succeeds a lot, but if he doesn't, I don't think he middles at this price tag a whole lot. I think that it's either he really pays it off or you want the White Sox.
I think it's a fair point. Now we got to talk about Indian bats, because the ownership here is going to be high. Like, I don't even have to look at ownership projections to know that it's going to be high. But if you do want to look at our ownership projections on days that they're not free, just use the promo code Deeper Dive, all one word, to get 50% off your first month. For ownership projections, Fantasy Cruncher, Lineup Builder, all of our articles, everything, and our player projections for all of our sports, use Deeper Dive, one word, get half off, 50% off your first month at awesemo.com. That's how you do it. I don't have to look at them to know that you're going to see high ownership here, Adam, but I will look at them anyway. And okay, big surprise, not at all. These bats are affordable, and they're going to be popular. Especially, I mean, you look at FanDuel, some of these guys are projected to have immense ownership. On DraftKings, Lindor 32%, Jose Ramirez 30% right now. They're cheap. They're going up against a lefty who hasn't really shown much at the major league level. On FanDuel, God, the ownership projections are even higher. 35 for Lindor, 30 for Ramirez. What do you make of this Indians team that is going to be super popular, but also very cheap and allows you to get expensive pitching in?
Yeah, so I mean, at the very least, it's a team that you should be looking to in cash games because the price tags are so appealing and because cheap pitching on this slate is pretty much a dumpster fire. So you're not going to be wanting to really get to those guys in that format. In tournaments, they are a really good stack. They're a high probability stack. The issue is just the ownership, like you said. Right now on the stack tool on awesemo.com, we have the Indians with the second highest chance of being the top stack on the slate, but also with the highest aggregate ownership. So, it's if they do go off, it's just a really high scoring slate and you're still competing with a lot of lineups. Whereas if you are underweight on them and overweight on, even some other popular stacks, like Texas or something like that, you're at least a little bit more contrarian. So, and I think that it's also worth pointing out that if you look at the Cleveland hitters against left-handed pitching, Carlos Santana, a 177 ISO since 2017, not as much power from the right side. Jose Ramirez has a 217 ISO, but he's having plenty of issues at the plate, regardless of who he's facing right now. So while I do like him, I think that there's a pretty easy path for him to fail. Jordan Luplow has shown plenty of power, but we're talking about 120 plate appearances over 3 years, so it's not a sample size that we can really buy into. Lindor is really good, but the point is being that it's not the best collection of hitters here, and it's not real difficult to see how they fail. But Manny Banuelos has been really, really bad, so that's why they're really good point per dollar plays.
All right, I'm with you. God, and Luplow was with the Pirates too, right? So he wasn't hitting in a particularly great park for all that much or for that long. Anything else on this game? We got 2 more to go.
I do think that Lindor is clearly the top shortstop play. I think that Ramirez is the best third base play in cash, either him or Justin Turner, I would say. But third base is a little bit deeper because you also have a cheap Kyle Seager and you have Asdrubal. So if I'm choosing between Lindor and Ramirez, I think Lindor is the one that I'd probably have more exposure to.
All right. Fair enough. Dodgers, Mets, Hyunjin Ryu, Jason Vargas. Another high total in this game. Dodgers are sitting up right now at 5.4. This one's come up significantly throughout the day. Biggest favorite on this slate, minus 276. Mets at a 3.2 total. Huge dogs on the road, no surprise. Hyunjin Ryu's expensive, though, and I like the guy for sure. But do we see the need to go there when you're talking like strikeout stuff and innings pitched, like how deep he's going to go in the games? You can kind of get that with Carrasco, and I know how good he's been, so I don't want to take it away from him, but might I add, you could probably get something very similar with a cheaper Charlie Morton too.
Yeah, that's kind of the point that I got to in the deep dive article today. Ryu's been really good this year. But he's been good for DFS purposes, no question, but he's been even better for just real life pitching purposes. And if you kind of look at how he prevents runs, like the strikeout percentage is above average. He struck out 25.5% hitters this year. That's good, but he's walked 1.7% of hitters. So he's really just not letting guys on base. And that's a big reason that you're seeing him be so successful. That doesn't play quite as well for DFS. Like the not walking guys is nice because obviously it lowers your chances of allowing runs, and on sites that penalize you for walks, it saves you some points there, but it's not worth trading off for strikeouts. And while he has the 5th best PCRA among the qualified starters this year, he's the only pitcher in the top 10 of that metric with a strikeout percentage below 29.9%. And he's like 4.5 points below that. So from a DFS, just pure upside perspective, he's not quite in the same category as these guys that he's priced near. And then, when you put it in the context of this slate, he's a lot more expensive than, Charlie Morton, who has struck out 5% more batters than him. He's cheaper or he's more expensive than Carrasco. It's just really, really tough for me to get all the way up to Ryu here, especially because there's no SP2s that I really feel good about.
No, I agree with you. And I mean, it isn't to say that you couldn't get a huge game from Ryu, but it's not likely. Like fading Sale at that price, you're trying to fade that like 45 fantasy point game. With Ryu, even if he holds the opposition scoreless, you're usually not getting that same threat, at least at a much lesser rate.
Right. He doesn't have the same strikeout upside that those other pitchers do. He still strikes out a lot of hitters, and he's in a favorable matchup here, so it can happen. But you're basically just paying a ceiling price tag for him and then hoping he hits the ceiling.
Right. Exactly. All right. What else do you have here as far as bats go? Obviously, like I said, a 4.2 run total for the Dodgers against Jason Vargas, who honestly, I think Vargas has been a little bit lucky this year, actually. When you look at the BABIP against lefties and righties. Well, no, lefties has been, 350, but against righties, he's got a 268 BABIP, and he's still allowing over 1.5 home runs per 9. You like Dodger bats here? Let me add one thing. We don't have a lineup, or do we? Let me see. I don't think we have one yet. You don't have one yet, right?
No.
I think the Dodger righties make for good pivots off of the Indian bats if they're going to be a lot less owned, because they're very similarly priced, facing a lefty that gives up a lot of power. And while they haven't been great, many of the righties on this team, they still have pop. And it's not like it's a huge park downgrade from guaranteed rate field either. So that's my thoughts there. What are you doing with the Dodgers?
I love the Dodgers here. I'm hoping that they go a little bit overlooked because, like you said, they have some guys that are the same price point as the Indians, and then they have some really expensive guys where people are going to want to go to Texas. I'm hoping that maybe, I don't think they're going to be low owned. It's only the same slate, but I'm hoping that maybe they do come in as like the 3rd highest owned stack. I really like them because you go through, and while it is a lefty heavy lineup and they're facing a lefty in Vargas isn't dominant against lefties. Since the start of last season, he's allowed a 176 expected ISO, 352 expected WOBA to lefties. He's only struck out 18.4%. But then on top of that, the lefties on the Dodgers hit left-handed pitching well. Max Muncy, 183 plate appearances since 2017, has a 370 WOBA. 275 ISO. Bellinger has a 240 ISO. Seager's got a 115 WRC plus. Not as much power, but he also was playing through injuries for part of that time. Verdugo, in a very limited sample, has been above average. And then the righties obviously are good. Justin Turner in particular, I love. Kike Hernandez is a great second base option. I think that, they just are all really good plays depending on how the lineup comes out.
I don't have an issue with Chris Taylor either.
No, me neither. Especially if he's hitting the middle of the order, he's cheap too. But I could see where like Cody Bellinger on DraftKings, Cody Bellinger's $200 more expensive than Joey Gallo. It's going to be really tough for people to go to Cody Bellinger over Joey Gallo, but there's just as much upside. Like I think Gallo projects better, but they both have, a monster ceiling. And if you're going to get Bellinger at lower ownership just because it's lefty, then I'm fine getting the Bellinger. And I think that's the case for, a lot of the more expensive Dodgers.
Man, I'm perfectly fine with it. Really. I am. The ownership disparity there should be pretty huge too. Let's see. What do we have right now? We have Gallo at 14%, a little lower than I thought. He is expensive. Bellinger at 8%. So it's not that big. And I think a lot of that just comes down to how expensive they are. But Bellinger's not going to be popular. I think we both know that much. Muncy, 4%. Chris Taylor at, he's up there actually. He's up at 21%. And Kike Hernandez is always going to be high projected for a lot of ownership if he's leading off against the lefty. That doesn't surprise me at all. So they will have some popularity, but I do think it'll be less than Cleveland. Do you want to touch on anything else here?
I think that in large field tournaments, you can get to some of the Mets. Peter Alonso in particular, he's only $4,000 on DraftKings. So he's basically the same price as Carlos Santana. And the matchup's a lot worse, but he has a lot more power than Santana. If you're talking about someone that, if you're just looking for like 2 home run upside, Alonso gets there more frequently than Santana does. And actually he's a little bit cheaper. So, I think that making a pivot like to an Alonso or a Wilson Ramos, right-handed bats that do have some power, is a low probability but high ceiling play.
Sounds good. And any interest in a catcher play from the Dodgers, whoever's in the lineup?
Yeah, either one. Russell Martin's inexpensive. Will Smith's even less. It's not that they're particularly good hitters or anything, but they're facing a bad pitcher, and catcher is really bad.
Yep, catcher's always really bad. God, it's bad today too. No surprise. All right, Adam, let's get to the last one here. Hey, by the way, did you guys, hopefully anyone that isn't a premium subscriber at Awesemo.com has entered themselves to win the free all access yearly sub, because it's free to do. And all you have to do is go to our handle on Twitter at Awesemo_com, and you can win a free year of all access subscription, plus a one-on-one coaching session with our boy Awesemo, Alex Baker himself. We don't even know what the value of that is, but we know the package value is $699. And all you have to do is guess the closest number of total points the Warriors and Raptors score tonight in Game 1. Reply to the tweet. It's the pinned tweet with your guess. You got to retweet it and follow the 2 Awesemo accounts, Awesemo_com and Awesemo NBA. So very simple. Takes no more than 30 seconds, and it throws you into the running to win a free year of all access membership subscription, plus a one-on-one coaching session with our boy Awesemo. Get in on that and check it out. It's the pinned tweet at Awesemo_com on Twitter. Last game, Seattle Mariners, LA Angels. Yusei Kikuchi and Felix Pena as your probable long man here. Well, let's get into pitching, because Jake and I were both a little bit surprised today to see that Kikuchi was projected for basically the same ownership as Joe Musgrove on DraftKings. That has changed, though, now. Musgrove is at 19 still. Kikuchi's at 10. And Felix Pena is at 2% as the long reliever here going up against the Mariners. You mentioned that there really aren't any SP2s that you like a lot, and I agree with you. Is there any willingness to go to either of these guys tonight?
Yeah, begrudgingly. I wrote up Kikuchi today because, for one, you do have weather concerns for Musgrove, and for two, it's a tough matchup for Musgrove. Kikuchi's the kind of pitcher that I hate rostering, and I very rarely, look to him or look to guys like him, because while he's basically completely average at limiting runs. He's a below average strikeout pitcher, and he's in a terrible strikeout matchup against the Angels. But the ballpark is favorable, and the Angels aren't any scarier than like the Brewers are as far as, production against you goes. So if his ownership is coming in significantly lower than Musgrove's, I wouldn't mind getting to him. It's not a play that I have a lot of confidence in. It's just, you hope that he goes out there, gives you like 5-6 innings and gets like 15 points or something. And then on the other side with Pena, it's pretty tough. I mean, he hasn't thrown more than 70 pitches since May 9th. He threw 86 pitches. But more often than not, you're going to get like 65 pitches from him, which isn't great for someone at $7,500. But at the same time, there are some strikeouts in the Mariners lineup, and it's not any worse than the other guys that we talked about. So I don't think I'll get to a lot of Pena, because at that price point, you're starting just to get to where I'm sacrificing bats, and I'd rather just save money and go to Musgrove or something. But Kikuchi, I expect I'll be getting some SP2 exposure to.
Okay. I think that makes some sense. No interest in Pena here, right? We don't know if he'll throw more than 65 pitches.
Yeah, I mean, it's just tough to really justify a $7,500 price tag for that.
Certainly is. What about bats?
Not a ton. I mean, Mike Trout's obviously Mike Trout, but I would rather, honestly, I'd rather get to Bellinger or Gallo.
So would I.
Not a lot of power in the Angels lineup beyond Trout, and it's not a great park for hitting. On the other side for Seattle, you have a favorable price tags on like Haniger and Malik Smith. Jay Bruce, if he's in the lineup, Kyle Seager's really cheap. So I think maybe getting to some one-offs from the Mariners, but I don't think that either of these teams will be a team I'm really full stacking.
Okay. That's fair enough. Well, that didn't take very long, did it?
Did not. We're used to having the third man now.
We are, exactly. Well, really, there's only 6 games.
Right. Yeah.
This one, the Angels in Seattle, really it doesn't take very long, and then a bunch of these games, it's fun. Let's break this down a little bit. With pitchers, you have Carrasco, and I do have some interest in Morton just because I think he's really good with a good K rate, and I'd rather have him over Ryu. So if I'm not going Carrasco, Morton's going to be my natural pivot here. And by the way, let me see if ownership projections have updated since this Boston game. Yes, 6 minutes ago. Let's take a look at this, Adam, and see what's changed, because we still had Chris Sale at pretty high projected ownership. Carrasco on DraftKings still at 4.8. Ryu at 34%. It looks like he's soaked up a bunch of the Sale ownership. Morton at 27. Musgrove now at 23. And then Kikuchi 19. Minor 18. Yeah, those are pretty much all the pitchers that are getting any significant ownership. Then it falls off a cliff down to Perez and Junis at sub 10%. Any thoughts on that?
I think that, so pitcher isn't where I normally really look to take stands all that often, unless I see something that
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Missing. But I think that the price or the ownership difference between Carrasco and Morton is a little closer than I would like. If Sale had been there, I think that Morton would have come in a lot lower, and I'd be a lot more interested. I do think that Martin Perez against this lineup, now that we have the updated ownership, I think he starts to get kind of appealing. I don't know how much I'll get to, just because again, it's not the kind of move that I normally make all that often. But with how many strikeouts are in the Tampa lineup, I do think that he probably beats Carrasco somewhere around 1 out of 4 times.
I keep looking at Chase Anderson and trying to entertain the idea of it. I know, Musgrove being cheaper makes sense, but I also don't know if it's the craziest idea. This game, have you seen any updates? From what I saw, it looked like you might have a delay, but I would think that it plays.
Yeah, it looks like maybe a late start or a delay. Obviously, one of those much worse for pitching than the other. Anderson's
held lefties to a 272 WOBA this year. Not a ton of plate appearances and less strikeouts, but I don't know. I don't think it's the craziest idea, just knowing that he's going to be virtually unowned, 8% on two pitcher sites.
I think Anderson is on DraftKings, he's only $200 more than Kikuchi. On Yahoo, he's $9 less. Clearly the play for me on Yahoo, but on DraftKings, I think that's the spot where if Kikuchi's getting 20% and Anderson's sub 10, I have them projected almost identical. So I would rather have Anderson.
Exactly. Right. And the thing is, I don't want all of my SP2 exposure going to Musgrove and Kikuchi.
Right.
That's not a great feeling.
Yeah. At the top end, like I have Carrasco as like a point better than Ryu, and then I have him like 3 to 4 points better than Morton and Perez respectively. So that's why I still think I'll be getting to a lot of Carrasco. I think that their ownership differences aren't big enough that I end up like dropping Carrasco to get to more of those guys. But where you have, Anderson and Kikuchi basically the same projection, I think that I would get more Anderson.
All right. Yeah, I think I would too. All right, let's do our top stacks. We'll head out. Of course, we have Live Before Lock coming up after this. They're going to start around 6 or at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And today we've got on the schedule for our Live Before Lock show going to go up to 7:05 Eastern as this loads for me. Thursday, Jake Hari, and Chris Spags. There you go. Jake and Chris going to take you up to lock. All right, what do we have for stacks here, Adam? Well, since it's only two of us, we'll give a couple extra. Even though there aren't nearly as many as I like today, even though I liked a lot yesterday, and the only ones that came through were Philly and, I don't know, maybe one or two more.
Yeah. So, I mean, the ones I like, I think are the pretty obvious ones with Texas, the Dodgers, and Cleveland. I do think so. The top stack tool on Awesemo is reflecting what we had talked about during the Milwaukee game, where Milwaukee's projected for really low ownership. And a large part of that's probably just because of Musgrove's projected ownership. We have Milwaukee as the top team in terms of top stack percentage compared to the biggest gap between the likelihood of them being the top stack and their projected ownership. So I do think that they're a really good leverage stack, and I would think that they're a team that I get to in a lot of non-Musgrove lineups.
All right, makes sense. And we had a good question in our premium Slack chat. FanDuel single entry pitcher. Who's your guy?
And let me pull my FanDuel stuff up. Who's yours?
For FanDuel, with no Chris Sale, it's going to be Carrasco or Morton. I mean, the pricing is close there. If you're talking cash, I'm just going to go Carrasco. But I think $9,700 Morton is really nice, and I don't think you can ignore the 31% K rate the guy has this year. Like, he's getting a lot of strikeouts.
Yeah. So I just pulled up my FanDuel projections and our ownership projections. I have Carrasco as the best pitcher there also. He's projected for like 10% more ownership than Morton, 5% more than Minor, 9% more than Ryu. Carrasco would be my number one guy, and I would just get contrarian somewhere with stacks, like maybe fading Cleveland or something. But if I were looking to pivot at pitcher, I think Ryu's the top guy.
All right. Sounds good to me. Anything else to add before we head out?
I don't think so.
All right, that'll do it. As always, thanks for tuning in. And before you do head over to Live Before Lock, you got 10 minutes. Hit that like button, thumbs up. It helps us out greatly. If you appreciate the show, you want to see more of it, hit that thumbs up because it does a lot for us and we really appreciate it. Also, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you always know when new content's going to drop. Adam and I will be back with you tomorrow on the Deeper Dive. Same time, actually maybe 15 minutes early. We'll see the slate size. 4:45, 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. One of the two. Keep your eyes out. We'll let you know. Until then, good luck. We'll see you back here tomorrow.